Hello everyone, and welcome to our post-mortem about Ashlands, our latest update on Valheim. And thank you for getting up this early on Saturday morning. That's, yeah, great. And first off, a little overview of what we'll be talking about today. First, a little overview of what is Valheim, for those of you who have not seen it. We're going to go through player types that we have in Valheim, a little bit about how we build a biome and the progression of that, how we worked on this biome, which was for the past year and a half, basically, before the release, how the reception has been, and some takeaways and final thoughts. But first, a little bit introductions of who are we. Yeah. My name is Jonathan Smars, and I'm the lead engineer and designer on Valheim. I've been a game dev for about 25 years, which sounds really crazy. Started off as a modder and game jammer, I can say, when I was like 10, and made a model, put it in a mod, and all of a sudden it showed up in PC Gamer, physical magazine at the time, which was really cool for like a 10 or 11-year-old. And then, yeah, the rest is history. I'm also a firefighter, part-time, and I love hot springs, so that's why I'm in New Zealand. Over to Andreas.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Andreas Tomasson. I work as a producer over at Iron Gate. Besides working on Valheim, I do love to go out hiking. I'm a sucker for mountains, so I think I'm in the right place as well here in New Zealand. Love to listen to music, addicted to that. Play the drums during my spare time, and yeah, I also do play a lot of video games besides Valheim as well. But that's enough about us. We'll let the trailer roll for you now, and let the trailer do the talking. So, yeah, Jonathan, roll.
Change the slides here. I have this one first.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I changed this around. A bit last minute here. So we're going to show a little bit about what Valheim is. And it's a game developed in Skövde, which is a small town in Sweden, about right in between Stockholm and Gothenburg, with about 40,000 inhabitants, I think. There's a lot of quite successful small game companies there because of the university that is there. One of them is Coffee Stain, who are also our publisher. The project started off in 2019 as a solo dev project by our founder, Richard Svensson. It was going to be a peer-to-peer MMO little project, and you can see a little GIF of it up there, of one of his early videos that he posted on YouTube about it. It's definitely very different, but you can probably recognize some of the assets that are actually still in the game. We sold 10 million units within 6 months, and a lot more since then as well. It's a brutal Viking exploration game for 1 to 10 players. It has a huge procedural world with 9 biomes, and we also have a number of partners that have helped us out with these cool animated trailers that we showed you before we started off, from Brick, and some other partners for helping us out with other platforms as well. And the cool little animation here is during a certain point in time, the most Googled phrase in the entire US was Valheim. So, but yeah, as Andreas was saying, better than talking about it, we're going to show you a trailer of what it actually looks like. So let's see if this one works. I'll just run it here.
Press again. Cool. So now, when you've seen Valheim a little bit how it looks like, we just want to break it down a little bit as well when it comes to the typical playstyles that we see. And that's something we call the ABC of Valheim that our colleague Robin came up with, but I think it's kind of genius. So we do have the adventurers, the builders, and the combatants within the game. So the adventurer, those are the ones who love to go out there and explore. They will take their boat and just head out there in the open seas and try to find new and interesting vistas and explore every single dungeon they can find, make some temporary home, and cook some food before they head out again. The builders, these are the ones who love to be at home. They love to build cool, interesting houses, make sure that they have everything they need, make sure that there's food for themselves and their friends. And I would say that the builders always keep on impressing us on what they build in Valheim. It's insane, really. Finally, the combatants. These are the players that we see that really like to fight every single thing we have within the game. They go out there and kill the monsters and bosses in different ways. I know some people have just tried to use their fists throughout the whole game, while others have tried to just dodge roll through the game. I'm not really sure why you would do that, but it's up to you.
So, when we designing a biome, one of the large parts of it, besides the visuals and the setting, is the general progression that a player has to get through the biome and move on to the next one. And meadows is the first biome that we have, and the first thing that the player encounters when they start playing the game, which is also means that that's their first impression of the game. And since the game did quite well, we think that it's probably a pretty good model to have to look at biomes after that as well. So we probably shouldn't stray too far away from that. It's a lush, calm, peaceful place and easing the player into the game. So it makes sense to make Ashlands into the opposite of that. As you can see from the list, you gather a number of resources, you fight a bunch of monsters that helps you craft a number of items so that you can reach the boss of the biome and defeat that boss to receive an item, which in this case is antlers, so you can create a pickaxe and advance to the next biome. While you can advance and it's not extremely, like there's no hard gates in that way, we do have these kind of gates set up so that to get the next line of progression you do need to usually defeat the boss. And there's definitely players who go outside of this as well, which is also crazy, defeating the boss in reverse order and so on. And that's really cool, but this is like the basic setup. Looking at the other biomes, you can see that it has a very similar pattern. And these are an important note here that it's not really just reskins though, that we have a lot of new mechanics in each biome. We're introducing something new, and there's also a fair bit of asymmetrical design here, so that it's not just the same number of things. Certain biomes have weapons that other biomes don't. Certain biomes have most of the biomes have dungeons, but some of them still don't. But the general recipe remains still the same.
Cool. So with all of that said, we try to break down a little bit of what Valheim is and how we look at player styles and the typical recipe of a biome. Now we'll talk about the meat of this presentation, which is Ashlands, and how we went from an empty biome that was just filled with coal and ashes to something that was filled with history, chaos, and lots of enemies. So some early ideas were that we kind of wanted it to be something that players did not expect. Our first idea was that maybe we should just go for lava monsters and lava golems and call it a day. That didn't really feel right, so we decided very early on that we wanted to make Ashlands the land of the undead. And so, who should be living in the Ashlands then? Eventually, we came up with the Charred. These guys are an ancient civilization in Ashlands who have kind of been tormented and turned by the final boss within Ashlands, which is Vader. And so we wanted it to be very combat focused as well. Players should not feel welcomed when they enter the Ashlands. They should feel like they should just go back home. You have nothing to do here. So eventually we came up with a few variants of the Charred. And on the screen here, you can see the Charred Twitcher, the Warrior, the Marksman, and the Warlock. They all have different patterns of attacks that they try to defeat the player with. From the get-go, we started out with a Charred Warrior with his two-handed sword, and that was basically just an idea that Robin had, that we should kind of make him look like Terminator. So first we just wanted to have him walking slowly towards the players, just looking menacing, and he would have just one quest in his life, and that was to kill you, the player. So 4 variants of the chart, maybe that should be enough of enemies. No, we wanted to have even more chaos within the Ashlands biome. As we were developing it, we came up with the idea that we should have a lava blob, and that's basically just a blob that jumps around, and if you hit it or kill it, it will explode, and it will destroy all the trees and or stones that are next to it, which turn things into chaos pretty quick. We have the Fallen Valkyrie, which is a flying creature that will shoot balls towards the player and make some AoE damage. We have the Morgan, a big pile of bones that just walks around and is very, very kind of scary. Then we do have the Askveen, that also walks around within the Ashlands. It looks kind of cute, but it's kind of deadly as well. Does have some pound attacks, and yeah. When you enter the Ashlands, you also have to fight the Bone Maw Serpent. That's a big serpent out in the seas that will try to stop you as well from entering the Ashlands. So, as we said, we wanted you to not feel welcome, and I think we kind of succeeded with that. We also added the vultures. In some other biomes, we do have birds as well, but they are friendly. If you walk up to them, they'll fly away from you. But we hadn't added birds for a while. We do have the crows and we do have the seagulls, but we want some birds as well. And of course, we just didn't go for like they're being passive as well. We decided they should attack the player also.
And another thing that we wanted to do was give the players something we called Fortress Time, which is basically very large locations, much larger than anything that we had had in the game before. We wanted to try to give them the experience of sieging a castle or sieging something. And there is a number of different designs that this went through. The one you can see here is one of the early designs that kind of reminds a little bit of, like, say, an Inca civilization. It's very different from what we ended up with, but there's definitely some inspiration there. For this, we also added things like the shield generator and a number of siege weapons like the battering ram and the catapult. One limitation that we had here was that locations or our buildings cannot be bigger than the size of one world chunk, which is a 64 square meter block. And that resulted in a number of design limitations as that is kind of a limiting space. And also, since the locations kind of change the terrain around them, and that is in the current system not really designed for the generation of the terrain, that resulted in a lot of interesting and headache-inducing bugs that I had to fix, which wasn't the most fun that I've had in developing this game. And in the end, I think we're quite happy with the results. Maybe it did not reach the exact vision that we had at the time. One of the reasons for this is that everything we put into the game has to be designed both to work well with single player, but also multiplayer. And castle sieges with tons of enemies probably would work better if you know that you're in, like, for example, at least 4 players, which we can't know. So the amount of enemies really has to be designed and balanced after that. But overall, I think it's pretty cool. We gave the players a new experience and some new toys to work with, not least the catapult that players can launch themselves into the fortresses after they've defeated one of those. And also, we have the other locations in the biome, which are more like the normal locations you can find around the world. These are various ruins from the old ruined civilization. The goal here was to have players have certain outposts within Ashlands, which are a little bit more calm, so they are not constantly bombarded by enemies. These work in a similar way to how it is if you build a base, where it will kind of block spawners from creating new enemies that are close to you. One major difference from other biomes as well was that Ashlands is located furthest down on the map, as opposed to the rest of the biomes, which are mixed up together procedurally around and scattered around the map. This resulted in a huge area to cover. We no longer have the benefit of interesting interactions between biomes, where you would see monsters from one biome show up close to another one. But we do have other interesting situations here that, like, for example, we we created a gap between, as you can see, the top image here is from how the Ashlands looked before we have developed it, where you could actually just walk over to the Ashlands in certain cases. So we created a gap, an ocean gap for the update, so that we could guarantee the players to have to enter through the ocean, which we had created like a separate kind of difficult entrance into the biome. And this also let us know, like, you are in the middle of the biome or you're close to the edge, so we could have a certain area like that's a forest in the beginning, and when you get closer to the middle, that's where you encounter the fortresses and such. And these are things that we're not able to design as much with the other biomes, as we cannot control the sizes and edges in the same way. One downside to this, though, is that we really do a lot of work to try to avoid breaking things for players. We never force players to restart their map from, like, their world from the beginning, even though that's like asked every single time we patch the game. But in certain cases for the new biomes, we change the height map, and that results in the player-built structures that they have placed on the biome might be up in the air or down in the ground, so they will probably fall apart if you're not super lucky. Yeah. And another thing that we added, it was also the lava and fire. And there's in the game, there's a lot of different environments like rain and mist and such. And one thing that can happen in the Ashlands is that it can rain cinder from the sky. And if these hit any of your wooden structures, they will start burning. And that will also spawn from fires in Ashlands because the environment is hot. And the funny thing is that this mechanic was actually developed several years ago because we thought it would be a pretty cool thing to have in the game, where if you build wood too close to a fire, that could start burning and your whole house could burn down. But it was not included in the game at release. But when we got to Ashlands, it's something that we further developed into something that we thought worked well. But adding it to the entire game that late would probably not be very popular for players who have built entire cities full of different types of campfires and such, if all of a sudden their entire city started burning. So this is something that only works in the Ashlands in the game, but we have added the option to enable it to work in the rest of the game as well. For the actual lava, we wanted it to feel very deadly, so that it's not something that you can just walk over or overcome in a way, but at the same time, we have a limitation in that regard is that you can basically die anywhere on the map in any way, and we always need to be able to recover your items which are dropped on death. So we had to make it possible for the player to be able to reach that again. And this is a really fine balance of tweaking the lava levels to feel really, really deadly, but at the same time not frustrating enough so that you can't get to your things.
Yes. So in all the biomes that we do have, we always have a main resource that the players need to gather. And it's always a metal, except Mistlands. But the players always have to go and mine it, and we know that that can be quite tedious. I know if anyone had played Valheim in here and you kind of get stuck in Black Forest and you just don't want to go and get any more copper because it's so annoying. We've all been there, but we do need the main resource. It's kind of in the recipe of a biome within Valheim. So we wanted to spice it up a little bit in the Ashlands, and some very early ideas there were that we wanted, at first, we said, let's just have something that comes up from the lava and it will roll away and it will eventually cool down and the player should then be able to mine it. That felt kind of weird. Another idea we had was that we should have some huge lava crab walking around, and the player should then have to kill the crab, and the crab would then die, would kind of cool down, and then the players would be able to mine it. For some reason, we had a lot of iteration on this one. On the pictures here, you can also see a few variants that we did try. In the end, we decided that we want to put the main resource out in the lava because the lava was something kind of new, or it is new, and the player should be able to mine it somehow. We tried a few different platforms and tried to make it interesting, but more often than not, players would just fall off the platform and instantly die by the lava. Eventually, we came up with, all right, let's just do a huge tower of flame metal, which is the new metal, put it on a platform, and give it a chance to eventually start sinking into the lava. So, in order to get to the flame metal, we added also the basalt bombs, which is basically temporary platforms that players will have to throw out, and it will stay there for a little while, and I'll have to jump, kind of a little bit of a platformer, out to the flame metal and start mining it. And if they're lucky, it won't start to descend, but it may start to shake and start to descend. That will create pretty much chaos for the players, and they'll have to throw out more temporary platforms into the lava in order to get out of there. So, that brings us also to the iterative process that we do have at Iron Gate while working on Valheim. There's lots of iterations, no matter if it's a monster, if it's a feature, build pieces, or locations. No matter what, it more often than not go through tons of iterations. And the reason behind that is because we want to make sure that we believe it's the right thing for the game. We could just add something, but if it doesn't make sense to us, then we don't feel like we should add it. So just a little bit of an example here. You can see on the pictures there are things that we kind of concepted and were thinking about. Morgan was sometimes just swimming in the air, and that wasn't right, of course. But the monster pipeline is an example we would like to go through with you. So I'm sure you all know how a typical pipeline can look like. You go from idea to concept art, then it goes into the model, texture, animations, implementation, some testing, and you call it a day, right? At Iron Gate, kind of more look like this. So if you see it, the flowchart at the bottom there, we can have an idea that goes into concept art. The concept art just looks weird or just doesn't work for us. We go back to the drawing board. Sometimes we jump from ideas to the model, and Robin tried to iterate over and over again, but eventually we just realized that this is not the thing. Textures, I believe that's the one that we usually not try to intervene too much when it comes to changing it. Animations is a lot of back and forth between our animator Christopher and Robin, our art director, to make sure that it kind of fits and feels good. Then comes the implementation, and there's usually some back and forth between whoever is implementing the thing with the animator as well, because sometimes it feels like the attack from the enemy feels off, or you don't know when it's hitting you. It feels like the enemy is cheating. And then eventually testing. And when I was making this flowchart, I realized I could just have this flowchart as a statement of QA is important. So if you don't have a QA in your team right now, I would definitely recommend you to have one, at least. Because whenever we test stuff, we can realize that there's things that is wrong with the model. Maybe something looks janky while they're walking in certain areas. Maybe the texture looks weird in certain lighting. The animation feels off, or maybe the implementation is weird. The damage is way too low or too high, or the balance is completely off. Eventually, though, we finally mark something as done. And it can take a few days, weeks, sometimes even months, before we say, wait a minute, this one doesn't really feel like it's fitting anymore. So then we may change a little things here and there, the animations or the implementation, or maybe just remove the creature entirely because it no longer fits the big picture. Some things that we really struggled with during the Ashlands development was the Fallen Valkyries. So that's a flying creature that we wanted to both attack the players from range, but also in melee range. We've never done something really like that before, and trying to find the sweet spot was very difficult. At the beginning, we had some ideas that the Fallen Valkyrie should be able to land and then should start walking around and have different attacks, and then fly away and have different attacks while it's in the air. That didn't really work out. Another idea was that it should come swooping down, kind of like an airstrike towards the player before it just swoops away again, and keep repeating that. Did not work. Same thing with the vultures in the game. They felt very derpy for a while, and internally we did call them turkeys for a long time because it looked like big, huge birds just flying around. They were not having any tilt while flying, so it just looked like they were hovering up and down. Sometimes they were flying sideways, just very, very weird. So it took a long time to get those pretty good as well. Morgan flying and Fode was yeeting around as well because they had some attacks we wanted them to have. We wanted to have some force in the attacks that they had. But what happened was that Morgan had an overhead attack, and when we swung his arms into the ground, it would look all right if it was on a flat surface. However, if it did his attack towards an edge, a stone, whatever, he would just fly away and you would never see him again. While testing, it's really fun to see this. Like, you start laughing, and I think players will laugh at it as well, first time to see it. But if we would keep it like that, it will start to feel like it's not polished and it's getting kind of weird. Fodder had the same thing, the final boss in Ashlands. He had some attacks that was dodging left and right, but he had the same issue, so eventually we had to remove that. I also want to briefly mention the flame metal armor. That was something we also struggled with a lot. I don't know how many iterations we had on it, but sometimes you kind of looked like a Power Ranger in the very early models of it. Sometimes it looked like we haven't even tried at all to make an armor. And that went through tons and tons of iteration. But eventually we did find something that looked really cool and something we were happy with. And also, with Ashlands, we wanted to be combat oriented. And so in Valheim, it's usually you hit the monster hits you, you try to block it, and you attack it again, rinse and repeat. In Ashlands, we wanted to really feel like we're pushing the combat. So we added some feint attacks, we added dodge rolls to the enemies. And I think that really made it a bit more interesting for the players to find themselves that they're all of a sudden maybe not even to perfect block that new monster. Yeah.
Yeah, so one reason that this works for us well, and I'd like to talk a little bit about how we work at Iron Gate, and yeah. I think what makes a really big part of any game is that how the team works together, the culture that is at that company, how the constellation is. So I'd just like to go through a few of our values of how we look at our games. So first off, as Andreas was mentioning, certain items that we work on, like assets, monsters, and weapons and such, sometimes it'll take a day to make one monster. Like we have an example where we just started on a Friday. Robin had this idea, like we need to have a bat in the cave, and before everybody went home on Friday, it was completely like modeled, textured, animated, and implemented and tested. And other days it'll take sometimes weeks. And I think one of the important things to note here is that you can't really plan or time box exactly how much everything is going to take. Sometimes it'll go quickly, and sometimes it really needs to go through a lot of iterations before you can find something that you're happy with. Also, making sure that you reach the same amount of polish on everything that you do, so that we strive to have a fairly high level of polish, which is maybe why sometimes people say very nice things to us, like it doesn't feel like an early access game, yeah. So one thing that we do is we don't leave things half done inside the game. We don't treat it as early access in the way where we leave buttons or features where it basically says work in progress or it feels really broken. Basically with the exceptions of the empty biomes at release, because we wanted those to be there to make sure that your map is ready for all the updates that are going to come before 1.0. Making sure that you polish is very important, but at the same time we don't want to go too far, because you can end up polishing something forever. So we also always strive to make everything just good enough, to not overcomplicate things or spending way too much time to actually be able to finish the game. Some of the things that we do at Iron Gate, which I think are really important to talk about in this industry, maybe more at, say, GDC rather than NZGDC, because it seems like you guys have a pretty chill lifestyle here. But we have 7-hour work days, we never crunch. I'll just push out all of these guys. And try to have a nice work-life balance for everybody working at the company, make sure everybody's okay, talk to each other, and also staying as small studio is one of our goals, which is also a reason why, for example, when working with an asset, as in the previous slide here, it's usually 1 or 2 people doing an entire asset, and it's so much easier when you're very connected with the people that you're working with, and not just sending it off down the production line. And also, as Andreas was pointing out, I want to talk about the power of having a really close QA, because sometimes you're working on something and you just send it off, and later, days or weeks later, you get it back and be like, oh, this is actually broken. And then you're already disconnected from what you were doing and how you were thinking about it back then. So one thing that we tried to do, like in the beginning, Andreas was actually QA as well as like moving into producer role. And I would just make something and push it, and like within minutes of me not even leaving, being completely done with it, he already found some stuff that was broken with it. And it was a really nice workflow that ended up like being very productive, but also very fun, and not like tedious and like always having to go back and go back.
All right. So, as we showed in the beginning, kind of the recipe of the biomes, how did Ashlands end up then? So, players enter the biome, they gather the flame metal, some ashwood, graustian, sulfur, smoke puffs, you name it. They fight all the monsters within there, the Chard, the Fallen Valkyrie, Morgan, Askvin, and they get a lot of new different materials from these as well. And then they will combine these items to craft items to get stronger, such as the flame metal armor, a medium armor, or a mage armor, if they so desire. Then they can also craft some flame metal weapons and shields. And something we haven't spoken about yet is the gem weapons in Ashlands. And that's something that we wanted to add because the players should also feel like they're a bit chaotic as well. There was a lot of chaos going on in the Ashlands, and we wanted to give the players a little bit more of a fun thing to use while being there. So, with the gem weapons, we did add 3 different types of all the different weapons that we have. So you could have a flame metal sword, which is a regular sword, but you could then combine it with a red gem that would turn the sword into a blood weapon. Or you could turn it into a lightning weapon, or a nature weapon. And all of these kind of have different kind of playstyles when you're using them. So for example, the blood weapons are using, whenever you have, the lower health you have, the more damage you do. The lightning weapon have a chance to proc chain lightning when you hit enemies. And the nature weapon has the chance to root your enemies while you're hitting them. And we believe this was very interesting to add to the Ashlands, and it's something we may look into a bit more. It did add a ton of more work, because you need multiple more new models and VFX to add it, but in the end we would say it's worth it. Once you have your gem weapons, you try to defeat the final boss, which is Father. And when we try to break it down into the ABC of Valheim as well, we try to, it's interesting to create these slides because we don't really think about it while working on it, but when we do break it down afterwards, it's kind of interesting to see like, okay, we did actually give all of these sections something. So the adventurers, they get mysterious places to visit, interesting vistas as well. We added a huge new boat that players can use while traversing the seas. They get the rideable Askvin that they can use as well while running around in the Ashlands. And we also added something we call the Derwin side quests. The Derwin side quest is 3 different unique locations within the Ashlands. And if the players are able to find them all, they are then able to craft the sword Derwin. And that's a unique weapon that they will be able to have in the world. This was something we thought was very interesting, and it's most likely something we'll continue to look into because we had fun doing it and the players really enjoyed it as well. The builders, they got tons of new build pieces. We added the graustian, similar to stone. Lots more items to play with. Very challenging locations to try and build a base. They could try to build it out in the lava or above the lava, or just anywhere in Ashlands because it's very hostile. They also have the tameable Askvin that they can pet and feed, and also some plantable vines that can also just make your base look even better. The combatants, I think they really got the big part of the whole update here. They got tons of new weapons and armors. They got the fortresses. They got siege weapons they can use within and outside of Ashlands. Lots of new enemies to fight, and eventually they have to fight the boss Father as well. So, now you've seen some work in progress. We talked a little bit about Ashlands. Now we'd just like to show you the gameplay trailer that we released as well, to give you a little bit of a vibe of how it looks like.
Okay, so I'll just do it like this. So Ashlands was released this spring, first off in public test servers, then later going on to the live versions. And our reviews over the Ashlands release period were about 90% on Steam, which overall is really good, and something to be happy and proud of. And I think we are overall quite happy about Ashlands. But it's also a slightly lower than we've had on previous updates, and the game overall going down from like 96 total. So some players are really happy with it, find it amazing, find it fun with the difficulty and so on. But there's also a number of people that find it way too hard and think that we ruined their entire game. One thing to take away from this is that a lot of the negative reviews that we received during the time are players with very large number of hours in total, and it's hard to see how their entire game turned into a negative rather than a positive. But our hope is that later maybe they will see it more as a part of the whole, maybe fit better into the game. But this is not maybe a recommended strategy to plan ahead of time, because you're still going to probably receive a number of negative reviews for it. For us, it's a little bit of a sticky situation because we're working on an end game part of the game, which is definitely going to be a difficulty spike, but it's also a content update for players which they have waited for a long time to receive something, and maybe some of them just want to come back and have some more juicy stuff to play around with, but are met by a very difficult, high difficulty spike instead. And so as releasing if it was released together with the game from the start, I think it would have a very different feeling, because you have had maybe players that haven't played for a year and a half, or even 2 years or 3 years, coming back and not being maybe up to par with what they were doing when they stopped playing the game. During the public test, we definitely received a lot of feedback, and we did a number of tweaks to tone down the balance a little bit, both up and down in certain cases, and this was very valuable feedback for us. One thing that happened was that even though we did patch it a few times, the more bigger balance patch that came was released quite soon before summer. So it was pushed on the public test branch. There was a number of fixes in there that we weren't completely sure about, and while everybody was going on summer vacation, which people do in Sweden, then this was laying in the public test branch for quite a while. So the impressions that players were getting were a lot of players were probably playing on the live branch and maybe not having the actual version. But overall, I think there's some fair criticism. There was some fair criticism in the feedback that we got, but overall I think we're quite happy with it. We'll probably keep doing a few more tweaks along the way of things that have shown up since then, and something that, just like all the other biomes, we'll do small tweaks here and there for the 1.0 release. Yeah, and as you can see here, some of the various thoughts of people from Reddit or Steam. And yeah. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Right, so we're going to have a short question session, and I realize that we're very close to it now, so I'll just run through this real quick. Did we end up with the biome that we aimed for? I would say yes, because in the beginning we did want it to be very chaotic, and you should not feel welcome, it should feel very hostile. I'm very proud of the team that we managed to create this, and it's the biggest content pack we've had ever so far. Tons of new monsters, new boss, the enemies, the weapons, the armors, new build pieces. And also, it's hard to please high expectations. We have very high expectations on ourselves, and I know that players do as well. And so if things take time, the higher expectations you may most likely have. And that's a kind of bad spiral going down. Could probably be a talk by itself, really. So yeah, want to go through the takeaways?
Yeah, some like out on screen here, you can see some of the takeaways that we have. In the end, we always try to follow the fun, which we were doing during this time with a little bit more combat focus, and something that we want to continue doing, maybe from multiple perspectives as well. We did add the Derwin quest, for example, something that we would like to explore more. We thought that worked quite well. Another thing is to maybe not always reinvent wheels for every biome, that we could do a lot with what we have already. Playtest, we do playtest quite a bit, but it's something that we always want to improve on and do even more. and keep listening to our players, getting the feedback that we can and listen, because those are the people actually spending most of the time in the game. Yeah, I think that's it. We have some time for questions. If you guys want to get a hold of us afterwards, you can probably like talk after this outside here, or you can write to us on email or Twitter. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, raise a hand. I think we have a microphone somewhere that can be sent around. Over here.
Hey, I was just wanting to know how the feedback from Mistlands affected the development of Ashlands.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things for Mistlands was we didn't have a lot of good systems in place to get feedback. And so that's something that we improved over the time, like during and quite soon after Mistlands. We mostly just like randomly sample, reading Steam forums, reading Reddit, see what's upvoted, watching Discord. We have like a number of different channels, but we did add a much better way to submit like both bug requests and feedback on our website. Maybe you have or anything else you're thinking about?
No, I mean, Mistlands did make people hate and love it as well, similar to Ashlands. Some people loved it, some people hate it. And yeah, I think that's also when we're doing something right, because we get a lot of strong reactions. And so, of course, we don't want people to hate the game, but if they hate the game, they most likely have some fair criticism as well that we can learn from. And I think we definitely did that with Mistlands. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
The question I wanted to ask was, you decided early on to have like a low texture density for the characters. Do you ever regret going forward that like, oh, I would just want this tiny bit more detail, but we can't with the amount of texture detail we currently have set for everything? So do you ever feel locked into your style? Because, sorry.
I would say we're mostly quite happy with it. It's a good style to be able to work and create quite a lot of content with a small team, so it suits us very well. But it's definitely another area, just like, okay, so Ashlands and Mistlands are much more filled with content than previous biomes in a lot of ways, because of like growing expectations both externally and internally. But also, if you look at like some of the early assets compared to the later ones, they're definitely like pushing the boundaries of that a little bit, where you can see early items are less detailed, and we always want to put a little bit more detail in. So it's definitely something that certain items that we're building, we always have to go in and say, this looks awesome, but actually we have to tone it down, like remove half of all the vertices or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely a limitation that we have.
Thank you.
Hi, my question would be that I feel like part of Valheim's charm, besides all the combat and everything, is the atmosphere and the music, and I was just wondering, when did that come in the game development process for you? When did you start thinking about music and just how it feels to just be idle where people build around you, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's quite of a big machine, right? Whenever we're developing a new biome, and music takes time, and sound effects do take time. But we do try to poke Patrick Jarlestam, who's making all the music in Valheim, quite early on, to have some discussions. Even if it's very rough Ashlands, we kind of try to show him what it looks like and discuss with him what it feels like, and what we're aiming for. And then we have a few iterations there as well on the music. And yeah, Patrick makes something, and then he comes back to us, and we say, no, that's not really what we're looking for, and eventually find the sweet spot with him. Same thing with SFX. We also have great people there, Ghostwood Empire, who are helping us with the SFX, and we also try to get them in as early as we can. But it's, I would say, kind of through the mid, yeah. Not too early and not too late.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that, like, I think one of the reasons why those two parts of the game are very, I would say, high quality, is that they are very important for everybody in our team. Not least our founder. He has a very good eye for visuals and atmosphere, but also has a really good eye for music and sound. So even though like some of the tracks that we can hear, like, oh, this is a great sound, and he's like, yeah, but it's still not good enough in this case, because like he really has a vision for how we want us to feel in the world. And also the composer that we have is like trained in a classical manner, so it's a little bit different from what you would find in maybe a lot of other games. And I think that's maybe why the soundtrack is, I think, pretty cool.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. So you talked about getting a lot of your feedback from Steam forums, Discord, Reddit. Do you have any in-game analytics for looking at like where players are churning, or like where they're falling off?
Yeah, so funnily enough, we don't have any metrics at all at Iron Gate, so we have literally no idea how many people are doing what in the game. And this is, of course, probably a bad thing. Like, we've talked about it always, that, yeah, we should probably add this. We had it really early on, but it wasn't so popular to use Google Analytics, so we just turned it off. But I also think that there's a point to make in not following metrics or analytics too much either, but actually following, like, if you have a good vision of this is what you want to do, if you have metrics telling you that, oh, everybody's doing this, or this is what everybody wants, you may be drawn too far in those directions as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? No? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
yeah, we'll be outside if anybody wants to talk to us or anything. And thank you.